Locked inside a royal crypt is the founder of Boletaria, the last hero, old King Doran. But for him to be a hero, there must have been a crisis all those years ago, and the most likely scenario is that wyverns were terrorizing the land. Doran's bronze armor is highly resistant to fire damage, as is the brushwood set, an old armor owned by the Boletarian royal family since long ago. The brushwood set is only painted the color of brushwood, suggesting that the intent might have been to disguise the wearer as kindling, when, in reality, they were the opposite. With the dragons baited, they could then be dispatched. After all, in the words of Doran,
foolhardiness, aptly wielded, is said to be the mark of a king.
And Doran had all the marks of a king indeed. His weapon, the Northern Regalia, requires strength, dexterity, comprehension, and conviction to wield, and just as well, for this sword was left in the world to represent a choice. It's a weapon made up of two blades. Soulbrand, a weapon for those who seek soul power at the expense of others, and Demonbrand, a demon-rending blade that represents the clarity of man instead. Doran speaks on the power of souls, and he likely understood the temptations that come with them, so in the years to come, soul arts and the choices they presented would remain hidden. It was safer for mankind to be ignorant, and so, after the need for his superhuman strength had faded, he entombed himself with the two swords. The key would remain with the Boletarian royal family, but Doran himself, a veritable demigod, would pass into legend.
But in the dark state of our land, sometimes legends are all we have.
No thanks to Boletaria, the world saw the rise of monumental civilization, a magic-based society that controlled the world, owing to their mastery of the soul arts. In their insatiable pursuit of power, they discovered the Old One, and they worshipped it as this unfathomable deposit of soul energy. Alas, this lust for power was exactly the warning that was posed by Demonbrand and Soulbrand, and the Monumentals awoke the Old One, marking the beginning of the first scourge. Demons ravaged the world, amassing countless souls and covering the world in this deep, impenetrable fog. By the time the Monumentals had fought off the demons and led the Old One back to slumber, the world as they knew it was lost. But Boletaria, one of 6 lands, had survived.
In order to mend the fabric of what lands still remained, we entrusted 6 leaders with 6 precious archstones, one to the king of a small yet industrious land.
In the original Japanese text here, rather than the king being industrious, the king is called ambitious. This is an important distinction, for an ambitious king would have envied the control the Monumentals once held over the world and aspired a chance to take it for himself. For the time of the Monumentals had passed, and the soul arts had just been banned so that their mistakes could not be repeated. But Boletaria didn't need soul power. They never had, not since the days of old King Doran, who had set in stone this legacy that represented caution against the soul arts. Unlike the rest of the world, Boletaria had survived on their own strength, fostering this culture of honor and discipline and a strength in steel and stone. Now the titans surrounding them were wounded fledglings, flailing helplessly without their magic. Who can blame the fox to pounce? So over the span of 12 generations, the bloodline of King Alant worked to expand this small nation. And we see evidence of Boletarian conquest in most areas of the game as well. In Stonefang, miners fueled the Boletarian war machine, extracting and forging ore under the watchful eye of the fat officials. In Latria, the king's own son has departed with some of their rarest treasures, and a legendary archer from the Shrine of Storms now commands her phalanx for Boletaria. Generations of war gave rise to many famous heroes such as this. There was Alfred the Tower Knight, a mobile fortress, Metas the Penetrator, a walking cavalry, and recently, His Majesty's twin fangs, Bior, Master of the Greatsword, and Valifax, who held both wit and the blade. These were heroes to inspire the common troops, who head off to war clad in iron and clutching a flower called a blue lotus. It's a flower that treats bleeding, a token from those with loved ones who pray that they do not bleed out in battle. But not all soldiers in Boletaria drop the blue lotus. These dreglings are actually called slave soldiers in the original Japanese. They are the lowest of the low, victims of conquest, enslaved and then mercilessly sent back into war by their new masters. In fact, the one Dregling who speaks up on the matter, one who managed to maintain his sanity amongst the soul-starved, comments slyly that the demons themselves may make better masters than the Boletarians did.
But hell, at least the demons don't send us to our deaths in battle.
But what choice did they have? Stationed on the castle outskirts, visible to all, are the execution grounds, where the king's own executioner Meralda is tasked with eliminating his enemies. Defy his majesty's will, and Meralda will make an example of you, with many slave soldiers already condemned to become raging spirits, even in death.
You wretched traitor to the king.
So they stitch themselves up, and they strew together what defenses they can scavenge from the battlefield. They are all but living corpses, paving the way for the great heroes of Boletaria. History is written by the victors, after all.
The light shine upon my lord, the Boletaria!
The king, his knights, and his subjects were modest and plain, but also steadfast and compassionate. I have spent much time in my studies in the cultured countries of the south, yet no country holds my heart as does Boletaria.
By this point, magic and the soul arts were but a distant memory. Yes, Boletaria had thrived without their use, but their other sins had become too numerous to count. Slave soldiers, conquest, deception. This is the legacy that King Armand XII inherited on the day of his coronation. To his credit, it is said that he cared for his subjects and fought valiantly on their behalf, but remember, Boletaria is the conqueror, not the conquered, and Armand would have been facing pressure to expand the kingdom as generations of fathers had done before him. And so, for the first time in 12 generations, he decided to take up a sword from the old king's mausoleum. But which would he choose? Demonbrand or Soulbrand? His hand passed over Demonbrand to pull Soulbrand from its grave, and he kept it ever by his side. After all, there were no demons where he was slaying, only men. His path from here was to become increasingly lonely. By the time he reached old age, we can only count 2 left in his life: his son, Prince Ariona Alant, and Ridiel, Lord of the Frontier. Despite being middle-aged, Lord Ridiel is referred to as Little Alant, implying that he's the elderly king's younger brother or a similarly close relative. He certainly takes on less responsibility than King Alant, donning dirty leather instead of royal garb, and enjoying more of a reputation as an adventurer than as a lord. For there is a legend associated with Ridiel. It's said that the weapon he wields, the phosphorescent pole, was stolen from a witch in the sky. These words bring the Maiden in Black to mind. She's a witch who favors a long staff, living in a sky temple that hovers above a hinterland of icy mountains. The exact same sort of mountains that Ridiel was stationed to look over. Is too perfect. All evidence points towards the king venturing to this land for Ridiel and Alant to stage a raid, a heist upon the temple, to take from them as they had taken from so many others. But what the elder Alant would have found in this temple, the Nexus, changed everything. The king learned about the soul and could see the potential that it carried all around him. With this knowledge, he returned home to share these soul arts with his subjects, and sorcery spread like wildfire once again. Spells and magic rings exploded in popularity and began leaking across the continent. Having finally embraced the power of the soul, Boletaria flourished like never before. So much so that we even find an example of poor commoners affording luxuries like jade. If Alant cared about the impiety inherent in propagating these soul arts, their utility would have far outweighed any concerns he had. By every other metric, Boletaria was undeniably better off. Within this new era of discovery, Prince Ariona embarked upon his own investigation to tour the advanced countries to the kingdom's south, to learn unimpeded. The royal dressed as your average knight in the region by the name Ostrava. But to be safe, his father also sent one of his twin fangs as an escort, leaving Bior to earn a reputation abroad as the best-known user of his weapon and his armor. With the warrior's companionship abroad, the prince acquired all manner of strange inventions, both mundane and magical alike. Everything appeared to be going so well. But was it really? King Armand XII stood in his tower, finally looking back at his own shadow. And it was ugly. An empire built on the ambition of his bloodline, rooted in generations of cruelty and bloodshed. He was now also totally alone. His son was abroad, his wife is never mentioned, and little Ridiel is last seen in Latria, locked up in a cell. Alant's dissatisfaction with humanity is also reflected in his royal appointments around this time. The kingdom's day-to-day operations would have been run by the fat officials, openly shady sycophants who were only too happy to indulge their king's apathy for his kingdom, abusing their subjects at home and abroad. On the day of his coronation, Alant had chosen Solbrand, the bane of men, and with none outside his kingdom left to conquer, maybe he turned his attention inwards to his own kingdom. Alant had stolen the soul arts from the Nexus, so it follows that the monumentals there would have warned him of the consequences. Beneath the Nexus was an ancient evil, a poison that God had placed upon the world to counter man's own evil, should they use the soul arts for their own power.
Surely you have seen for yourself the pain and suffering that fills this world. But God is merciful, and so created the Old One, a poison to the poison.
All alone, the king departed for the Nexus and unsealed the Old One.
Back in the time that I lived below Boletaria Castle, King Alant left on some strange business, then returned with horrible demons in tow. Soon, the land was ravaged by soul-starved madmen.
He had fought like a demon for the sake of his legacy, and now it was time he actually became one.
The Old One will feed upon our souls and put an end to this tragedy.
However, fate toyed with him, for Alant is not the demon atop Boletaria. Instead, he became a wretched abomination deep below, barely able to lift himself off the ground. This demon form more accurately reflects his suffering when you think about it, but even if it wasn't perfect, he had still gained the powers of an archdemon, and that was enough. Within the fog, reality was whatever Alant made it, and so we see the demons of his imagination. Artifacts like the purple flame shield had pointed back to wyverns for generations, so Alant let them return as demons. His new demon knights towered higher than ever, based off the real knights whose deaths were all but inevitable, and Alant's most precious demon was a doppelganger, who presided over it all and who appeared to lead the demons. So, betrayed by their liege, each heroic knight was killed, except for one, Valafax, who escaped to the fog's edge. Despite the mortal injuries that he suffered, the twin Fang still managed to tear open a fissure in the fog and warn the outside world of what had transpired inside before he died. Refusing to believe the revelations, Bjor entered Valafax's tear, only to be defeated by the castle's wyverns and its black phantoms, who were the spirits of his friends, enslaved by the very traitor who corrupted them. With Bjor thrown in jail under the fat official's care and left to rot, Prince Ariona never heard back from him, and ultimately decided to enter the fog, alone, years later, where his inexperience shines through. And while Bjor eventually comes to terms with the truth about the king he admired, Ariona can't accept what his father has become, and he eventually takes his own life in the face of that reality.
I began this quest to ask my father his reasons, to drag him back to the path of righteousness. But it seems it was all in vain.
But in the words of Estrava, in Boletaria's darkest hour, legends are all it can depend upon. And in the deep fog, the line between legend and reality is blurred. The hero's spirit can now be roused from its slumber. His form can be made flesh, along with his fabled weapon and armor, and he can be bound as the eternal guardian to the last sword in his crypt, Demonbrand. The sword Alant should have chosen from the very beginning. Only those equal to the crown may take it, souls that rival a demigod. Are you worthy?
Prepare thyself, brave knight.
If you liked this video, then please check out its sponsor, NordVPN. So right now, they're offering a huge discount on 2-year plans, and if you go to nordvpn.com/VartiVidya and use code VartiVidya, then you'll get one additional month for free. With NordVPN, it just takes one click and then your connection is acting as if it's originating from another IP in another country. One of the features I always make sure I always turn on is the split tunneling setting, which allows the VPN to ignore certain things like the multiplayer games I play, but always guarantee that I'm anonymous through certain browsers like Chrome or Firefox. For some people, the perks of anonymity might simply be that you see less targeted ads on the internet. It can be creepy sometimes when targeted ads are too good, but for others, things can be more serious. Some governments prevent you from accessing certain kinds of news, and you can't trust a lot of them not to track what you're searching. No matter how you spin it, VPNs are just a powerful tool to have at your disposal, and NordVPN is cheap right now, so maybe take advantage of that. Go to nordvpn.com/VartyVidya and use code VartyVidya for that free extra month and the huge discount. Thank you for watching.